Good evening, and welcome to Galactic Terrors, the online reading series hosted by the HWA New York chapter. Happy New Year. Welcome to our first session in 2021. Carol, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Jim.
How's everything going?
Very well, very well. I'm optimistic that there's a new year. I don't know why a change in one day makes a difference, but somehow in my head it does. So that's cool.
It's like turning a new page.
I think so, yes.
Calendar for people who still use paper calendars. But welcome everybody to Galactic Terrors. We have a fantastic lineup tonight, and I'd like to start off just talking a little bit about what is Galactic Terrors. I think we haven't really ever discussed that on the program so far, and it is an online reading series, obviously, but why the name Galactic Terrors? Well, when we used to be able to do these reading events in person with the HWA chapter, we ran a series called Night Terrors. And we had a lot of fun with that. We did that in many locations over New York, around New York City over the years. The now defunct Lovecraft Bar, the now defunct Morbid Anatomy Museum, the now defunct Kill Bar. So as you can see, we have a great track record for picking locations that are doomed to close in the near future. So we're hoping that we don't wind up shutting down the internet with this. But when we decided to go online and realized we could reach out to audiences everywhere and readers everywhere, we decided to broaden the scope. Look for, at times, not strictly horror fiction, but horror sci-fi, horror mystery, things like that, and go galactic. And so that is what Galactic Terrors is. And we want to thank all of you in our audience right now for joining us tonight. We're so thrilled that you could be here. Our lineup tonight includes Stephen Van Patten, Patrick Freivald, Kathleen Scheiner, and Lee Murray, who is joining us from New Zealand. So we've got quite the, and even Patrick is coming to us from quite a distance. He's way upstate in the dark wilds of New York. Most people think New York ends at the Westchester border. It does not, which is an interesting fact for non-New Yorkers to learn. But in any case, Carol, I think there's some news from the HWA we can talk about.
Yeah, there's been a lot of things going on. One of the things that I love about the HWA is that it is very strongly involved in promoting diversity across all the platforms, a very strong belief in Black Lives Matter. And there's been an announcement of our first HWA diversity grant recipients. It's really cool. We have 6 folks who have received these grants. And with a name like Geysander, you have to understand that I am familiar with people butchering your last name, but I'm going to do my best on some of these. But the recipients are Jacqueline Dyer, I said this before we had the camera on. Yeah. Ogenechovui Donald Ekpeki, Gabino Iglesias, Nicole Givens-Kurtz, Tejaswi Priyadarshi. Oh, I'm better without the camera on me.
Priyadarshi.
Sumiko Salson. So congratulations to all the recipients. We're really excited to see what y'all have coming up in the future for the works that you're producing. So it makes me excited, doesn't it?
Yes, it's an honor to be part of the HWA. I've rarely been part of a group that is so dedicated to offering support to writers at all levels of their careers and from all different backgrounds and working on all different types of fiction. Horror really is probably one of the broadest genres you can write in. It almost defies categorization at times, and so I think it's great that we can really put our support behind many different voices, and it makes it an exciting organization to be part of.
And I think that's an excellent point, because horror sometimes can just be a mood or a feeling or that touch of the shiver down your neck, and that could come up in anything, in mystery, in sci-fi. I don't like the idea of horror romance, but that happens.
It works. All right. Speaking of the HWA, I should point out for those of you who are listening who are members, the Bram Stoker Award recommendations window is closing imminently. You have until midnight Pacific time tomorrow, January 15th, to recommend any works that you think are worth consideration for a Stoker Award. We have been getting some amazing recommendations this year. It's been a fantastic year for horror publishing, or 2020 I should say, was a fantastic year for horror publishing in a lot of ways. Despite all of the down news and the pandemic, a lot of really good horror novels and other types of horror fiction were published. A lot of great horror movies came out. And so we're very excited about what's building up to be a really brilliant list of contenders for the Stokers. So if you're a member, please get those recs in. Don't wait to the last minute. You drive everybody on the technical side crazy if we get like a flood of 100 recs at 11:59 Pacific time. We'll be announcing the preliminary ballot somewhere toward the end of January or the early February. So look for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exciting. You know, there's a good bit of reading that we've all been doing, and there's a good bit of reading in our future. You know, speaking of reading, did you get any good books for the holidays, Jim? Did you use a gift card to buy any, maybe?
No, I didn't actually get any gift cards this year, and I only got one book, which is unusual. I usually get quite a few books over the holidays or for my birthday, which hits just before the holidays.
Yeah.
But I did get one really cool graphic novel. It's this massive, oversized collection of Jack Kirby comics from the 70s, the Fourth World Saga.
Oh, cool.
So I'm pretty excited about that. But I have read a lot of good horror this year. In fact, I just finished, a few days ago, reading Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Cool. And was just really, really thrilled with it. Had such a good time reading that book.
Oh, cool. And I just got Red Hands by Christopher Golden, which is cool, the third in his Ararat series. And, you know, the folks who are watching us on YouTube or on Facebook, you know, we're glad you're all here. You're welcome to put stuff in the chat. If you've come across any good books that you like to recommend, feel free to drop those in. And, you know, use the chat also, because as we're talking to our readers after they're reading, we'd be happy to have any questions that you guys want to ask them. So feel free to drop those in the chats.
Yes, please question them, grill them, interrogate them. I told them all not to expect too much, so I'd love to surprise them and hit them up with a ton of like really tough questions.
Really turn the O.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think we probably should turn to the main event. The reason that you've all come here tonight. Thanks again for joining us. We're going to turn things over soon to our first reader. Carol, would you like to do the honors introducing Stephen?
I'd be delighted. Stephen Van Patten is the author of the celebrated Brookwater's Curse vampire trilogy and the Killer Genius serial killer series. He's also co-author of Hell at the Way Station, which won Best Anthology and Best in Science Fiction at the 2019 African American Literary Awards. He's published numerous short stories and is a contributor for the YouTube channel Extra History and the Viral Vignette series. Stephen is a member of the New York chapter of the Horror Writers Association, the Directors Guild of America, and professional arts fraternity Gamma Xi Phi Incorporated. He's also the publisher of Growth, the Basic of Our Gardens, a how-to guide for growing medicinal marijuana. Sequels to most of his horror stories are in the works, with Hell at Brooklyn T slated for an early 2021 release. I love that cover. His website is laughingblackvampire.com. Stephen.
Hey, everybody. All right, so real quick, I'm kind of jumping in the middle of my story. And basically what this is about a guy named Oscar, who he is the sole surviving member of an old school R&B group called the Tone Masters. Think Temptations, Four Tops, that kind of vibe. Like I said, I'm jumping in the middle of the story. So basically what's happening here is he's on a book tour and he's spending the night at his son's house. The son has a wife and an 18-year-old daughter. That comes in. That's important. So it's Ken, Tiff, and Tanisha. You'll meet them very soon. So basically, he's on book tour. He's spending the night at his son's. He feels a little guilty towards his son because he wasn't the greatest father. At least he thinks so. And he's spending the night. He's about to go to sleep. They've had an awkward dinner. It's, family dynamic stuff. But he's about to go to sleep. And then this happens. He was about to swing his legs over and get into bed when he heard a very gentle knock at the door. He stood up slowly. "I'm coming." On opening the door, he was pleasantly surprised to see Tanisha, then taken aback as his granddaughter practically pushed him back into the room and closed the door behind her. "Hey, sweetheart," Oscar greeted. "I thought you were going to sleep. Is everything all right? You're not still upset about that dinner conversation, are you?" "Oh, she's asleep all right," answered a voice that definitely wasn't Tanisha's. "She's asleep, and we're driving this here boat right here." Oscar's first and only thought was that Tanisha must have watched an old Ghost City documentary and taught herself to mimic the gravelly speaking voice of the Tone Master's deceased lead singer, Lloyd Slick Taylor. He was perplexed that she would spring this impression on him now. "That's not funny, Tanisha. Talking like Slick used to talk? Impressive, but not funny. You're a stand-up comedian now?" "Nobody's trying to be funny, This here is serious business." Tanisha's voice changed again, now sounding vaguely like Henry Big Hank Blackburn, the baritone. "What the hell?" Oscar shouted. "Oh, now this fool want to talk about hell. Ain't that just nothing?" A third voice, the most effeminate, a dead ringer for Charles Chuck Herring, the womanizing soprano who left a number of children fatherless when he died in a car accident in 1982. "Tanisha, stop all this foolishness. Stop playing with your granddaddy. You know, when we was alive, we did always have a hard time telling old stuff. You know, you always had to tell him a few things more than once before he'd actually believe it." "That was his, what do you call it, passive-aggressive way of dealing with shit he didn't want to hear?" "He was always stubborn. Couldn't tell him nothing." Three different voices. Oscar was now convinced the girl had lost her mind. "Stop it, for the love of God." "God? Seriously? You calling out God now? Get him into this? This ain't about him. Then what is it about?" "It's about getting the group back together. The Tone Masters Afterlife Tour with dates running for all eternity." "As it should be." "Amen, brothers." Oscar shook like a man suffering from palsy. He took a hesitant step forward. In the seconds it took his granddaughter to utter each sentence, her body language changed, taking on subtle mannerisms. But the most alarming thing was how her eyes changed, literally white to a slightly different shade of brown or green as Chuck's had been. "Fellas?" he asked. "Is that really you? Oh, now he's getting it." "Yeah, it's us, Good to see you, man." "Looking good for an old man, Negro." "Looking good, my ass." The clarity of finally knowing what he was dealing with gave Oscar a sudden rush of anger. "Get the hell out of my grandbaby." Oscar watched Tanisha's hands grab her hips the way Chuck used to when he laughed, although Slick's voice did the actual laugh. "How else are we supposed to talk to you, fool? You wasn't rushing to hold no seance." "We don't even know if that would work," Hank's voice slipped in. "Yeah, man," Chuck pressed. "You want us to do some poltergeist shit? Throw some lamps around? Rearrange the furniture? What would that do besides mess up your son's house?" "That cute daughter of yours sure would be scared," Slick added. "All right now, damn it. Besides giving me a heart attack, what exactly are the three of you trying to accomplish?" Oscar stumbled back involuntarily. He started feeling lightheaded, but had the presence of mind to fight it off. There was Tanisha's safety to consider. "Well, truth be told, we was actually kind of hoping you did have a heart attack," Slick admitted. "You see, we're getting the group back together, baby," Chuck chimed in. "What?" "What, you want us to beg? We ain't too proud to beg," Hank said. The entire exchange was maddening, but listening to Hank's baritone voice coming from Tanisha was probably the most jarring part. "You came here to kill me?" Oscar shook his head in puzzlement. "Is this because of the damn book?" The book! They seemed to shout in unison before bursting into laughter. Ain't nobody worried about no damn book. What you think? There's a shopping mall in hell and we all picked up a copy? Of course, the way I heard it, did leave some shit out, added Chuck. Like what? Like the part about him and Maxine? Any doubts Oscar may have had about what was going on dissolved at the mention of the name Maxine. Oh, hell, Chuck, what you got to bring that up for? Slick asked. It's not like Hank don't know Owen Maxine did the horizontal tango 3 nights before Hank married her. Talking about you had a stomach bug the night of the bachelor party. You had a bug all right, sneaky mofo. Hank, man, relax, man. Maxine confessed when me and the guys was in heaven. Wait, time out. Oscar held up his hands. Now y'all done said both heaven and hell. Now which one is it? And what the hell is Maxine doing in heaven? Maxine and the rest of the fishnets was on the same bill as us, Hank explained. See, when you're a famous musical artist and you die, you get to work in both heaven and hell. They're each massive places, and the celestials that run heaven and the not-so-celestials that run hell, they have one thing in common. They love music. There are some exceptions, of course, Slick added. Old Mahalia Jackson pretty much never leaves God's side. And the kids, what's them boys' names? Who? Biggie and Tupac? Chuck suggested. Yeah, them. They never leave hell. Always talk about how their old neighborhoods was much worse. I guess it's nice those two patch things up, Oscar observed. Speaking of patching things up, let's say you get to writing a suicide note and come on now. Plenty of angels in heaven want to see the full original lineup of the Tone Masters. And some of them are kind of cute, Chuck added. Damn, Chuck, Hank groaned. We don't even have dicks anymore. And how are you still thinking with yours? He's nothing if he isn't consistent, Slick quipped, using one of Tanisha's hands to grab Oscar's. Could kill myself? You guys can't be serious, Oscar stammered. With each remark and change of persona, Tanisha's head jolted slightly left to right. We are dead serious, baby, Chuck said. No pun intended. Yeah, man, Slick crowed. Don't have to be painful. Just take some sleeping pills. Or you could hang yourself, Hank suggested. You shut up, Hank. No self-respecting black man is hanging himself. What difference does it make, baby? Dead is dead, Chuck pointed out. But he don't have to die like he was killed by the Klan, Slick countered. It should be his choice anyway, Chuck said. So how you gonna do it, oh? I am not going to kill myself just to go frolicking with you fools as a ghost, Oscar shouted. Especially not in my son's damn house, so his entire family can be traumatized. Traumatized? Slick asked, as though there were nothing more absurd that he'd ever heard in his afterlife. We're already in your granddaughter. If you don't come along, maybe we just stay in here for a couple of months. Maybe we just stay in here for her first couple of weeks in college. Show her how to really have fun. Hold on, Slick baby, Chuck protested. Oh, it's still our friend. But we talked about this, Slick grunted. I didn't say I was okay with sexual stuff, Chuck continued. You done seen more black ass than all the toilets in Lucas Fried Chicken Shack back in New Orleans, and you're objecting to sexual stuff? Hank seemed to suddenly take control of Tanisha's body, along with her right arm. Yeah, Chuck. Besides, she's over 18, and she feels good. Tanisha's right hand ran across the side of her body, stopping just shy of her breast. Oscar stepped forward as fast as his weary legs could take him, grabbing poor Tanisha by the shoulders. You assholes, let go of my grandbaby! No, Slick shouted. We're staying until you come to us. Otherwise, your grandbaby is fitting to be real popular. I told y'all we should have just possessed him direct, Hank argued. That way, we could have just stuck his hand in a garbage disposal while he was asleep or something. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea to rush this, Chuck offered. After all, O is almost 80. Can't be long now. How's your blood pressure, O? Damn it, Chuck. I can't believe you chicking out on me now. After all we did, the promises we made to get here, do you realize what those demons will do to us if we show up without Oscar? Oh, yeah, because up until now, it's been marble cake and coffee, Chuck countered. Negro, you know what I mean. They're liable to put us in the weekly March on Selma reenactments like they do to regular black folks. I don't know about you, but I don't know how many Jim Crow ass whippings I got in me. I hadn't thought about that, baby, Chuck admitted. All right, let's get him. With Hank and Chuck now in full agreement, Tanisha's possessed hands shot out and found Oscar's throat. They applied pressure as prodigious to the point of godlike, as if, in fact, all three men were strangling him at once. At least they'll let Tanisha go, Oscar comforted himself with that thought as he started to see stars. He pushed against Tanisha as hard as he could, but he didn't have the strength to budge her. Even as he started blacking out, he regretted how he had let Kenneth down yet again. Starting to fall to his knees, he didn't see the bedroom door burst open, but then glimpsed Tiff's slippers in the bottom of her robe. His daughter-in-law circled around to face Tanisha. With his eyes filling with water, Oscar couldn't make out exactly what Tiff was holding, but it looked like a small torch. Let go of my child and get out of my house, Tiff screamed. Her normally beautiful face turned into a rictus of anger. Her hair, normally a flowing mane of perfectly coiffed extensions, was now wrapped in a colorful satin scarf. For a moment, Oscar felt as if he was being rescued by Harriet Tubman. Then, he saw a wide-eyed Ken enter the room and circle around to stand next to his wife. What's that she got in her hand? Hank asked. Oh, hell, that's sage. She burned sage on us, Slick realized. They said sage would tear us up, baby, Chuck added. We need to boogie on out of here. You're damn right. Let's go. We'll be back, suckers. The entire house shook, as if a small explosion had been let off, sending all four of the family to the floor. Lights flickered as the loving arms of Tiff and Kenneth found Tanisha and Oscar, respectively. After a few seconds, the shaking stopped, and the house was as still as if nothing had happened. Tanisha and Oscar began coughing violently. Oh my God, Tanisha finally said, with her actual voice. I have old man taste in my mouth. Sorry, honey, Oscar said between coughs. Granddad, I tried to fight them, Tanisha apologized, but they were too much. It's not your fault, baby, Oscar assured her. They all took a second to catch their breath. Then Tiff left the room to put out the burning sage. Ken helped his father to a seat on the bed. Good thing they were so loud. Oscar turned to Ken. Hey, how did Tiff know what to do? Ken shrugged. She's a black woman. She's intelligent and spiritual. She keeps sage in the house. Lucky for me, Oscar observed. Lucky for us, Ken added. His face then flushed with anger. The nerve of Uncle Slick and Hank and Chuck. I mean, damn. Tiff returned to collect Tanisha. Okay, let's get you back to bed. Mama, I was just possessed by 3 dead tone masters, Tanisha complained. Do you really think I can just go back to sleep now? Tiff shrugged. Let's watch a movie then, even though after a few minutes, the movie will probably be watching me. They had nearly left the bedroom when Tanisha suddenly stopped to address her mother. Mom, should I be concerned by how nonchalant you are after exorcising 3 ghosts? I mean, I know you're a badass and all. I'm a black woman. I'm intelligent and spiritual. I keep sage in the house, Tiff responded. Tanisha chuckled at how in sync her parents were. Understood. As the women left the room, Oscar turned to Ken. Son, I'm so sorry. This wasn't your fault, Pop, Ken reassured. I read your book. The Tone Masters were a crazy bunch. Apparently, they still are. Oscar's eyes squinted as he rubbed his bruised throat. No, I'm sorry that they were the reason I was gone so much. I am your father. I should have done more for you. Them showing up here to haunt me just makes it all feel that much worse. Oscar choked back a sob. Ken put his arm around his father. Pop, we've been over this. You were a great man. You made great sacrifices for the sake of music history. That needs to be honored, not resented. You did what you could, and Mom picked up the slack. I loved her, and so did you, and in your own way. She's gone now, and you're here. I'm not wasting a minute of your life or mine being mad at you. And it's a good thing, too. The old man looked confused. Why? Because I need you. Family needs you. For as long as you can manage to stay alive. I love you, Pop. They hugged. After a minute, Ken grabbed his father by the shoulders. You're going to have to forget about Florida. You're moving in here. What? Boy, who's the father here? Dad, you have to stay here. What if they come back? Hell, they said they're coming back. I'm sure there's something else we can come up with, because I like Florida. Maybe I'll just borrow some sage from my intelligent spiritual daughter-in-law. Oscar smiled as Ken laughed. They hugged again, patting each other on the back. Afterward, Ken watched as his father climbed into the bed before he shut off the light and closed the door. Settled under the quilt, Oscar let out a sigh. Somewhere out there in the universe, his 3 former bandmates waited for him, disappointed and possibly angry. He had no doubt they'd be back to claim him. But not tonight, suckers, Oscar mumbled, closing his eyes as his mind embraced sleep. Not tonight. That's it.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
You're getting some great feedback in the comments, and we do have some questions for you.
Oh boy.
Before we jump over to those, though, I'd like to ask you something, because I find that a lot of the stories that you read, you have an incredible knack for picking the most uncomfortable situation imaginable, and then finding in that all of the horror and comedy. Is that something you consciously do when you're writing, or does it just sort of come naturally to you?
I'd say it's a little of both. I tend to draw my initial inspiration from probably off the wall things, because I worked with the Four Tops once, and of course on Broadway I saw Ain't Too Proud to Beg, and and all of that a lot of that, and just my general love of music kind of contributed to that particular story, I want to say. But when I get into the story, then of course, with a little, I make it uncomfortable, like you said, but then of course I add my little special little, flavor and dialogue and whatever, and I have fun with it.
I always know when I'm reading or listening to an SVP story. There's no question. And I know you write about music often. You wrote another story, and I think it's probably too big a file for me to upload right now, which is lucky for you. But I do have video of your performance in the park.
Yeah. Dead. What do you call it? Dead Man Country. Yes. It's about a zombie that auditions for a sort of America's top country star reality thing, and I surprised you guys a little bit, I think, that day.
Yeah, that was great. Maybe for a future episode we'll add that as a special bonus.
Yeah, I have to after the pandemic, and I can get Lane in here, and then he can play guitar. Yeah.
All right, so let's go to audience questions. Ethel Pratt would like to know, when will Genius 3 come out?
Genius 3 is in process. Hey, Scott, it's in the process. It's like everything is kind of except for Hell at Brooklyn T. Everything is kind of like in a midway sort of phase right now. So I've got a Brookwater's Curse 4 in the works. I've got Killer Genius 3 in the work, and also everything's just kind of slowly pulling together. Because I got wrapped up with extra credit and a bunch of other things that kind of took my focus away for a little bit. But trust me, everything's coming out.
Awesome. Okay. Amy would like to know if you're writing more or less during the pandemic.
Definitely more. Definitely.
Awesome. Okay. And I just scrolled past very important question from Linda Addison. How did you learn to read so well?
Wow. Well, that's a great compliment coming from the Queen herself. I just practice, practice. That's really just all I did.
Awesome. Yeah, well, you've been reading for a long time. I know we've done a lot of HWA readings, and you've been out for a lot of them with your stories. So one more question. Where is that piece published, if it is?
Oh, funny that it's actually included in Hell at Brooklyn Tea.
Oh, okay. Terrific.
So, yeah, it'll be out.
Awesome. All right. Well, Stephen, thanks so much for reading tonight.
Thank you.
We will have you back on in a little bit to...
Cool. Going first, I get to start drinking now. So
exactly. Cheers, lift a glass, enjoy, sit back and enjoy the rest of the readings.
That's right.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so just before I introduce our next reader, I did want to take a minute to give a huge shout out and thank you to Lou Rera. Many of you know Lou. I should have mentioned this early in the first part of the broadcast, but our spiffy new video interludes, openings, and closings are all thanks to Lou, who is lending his expertise in video production to this reading series. So many thanks to Lou. We're really grateful to have him on board on the Galactic Terrors team. All right. Moving forward, our next reader is Kathleen Scheiner. Kathleen is an editor and writer living in Brooklyn, New York. She's written for Publishers Weekly, Scholastic, Chime for Change, L'écran Fantastique, Toxic, and Penny Blood. Her novel, The Collectors, was published in 2013, and her short fiction has appeared in Memoirs of Meanness, A New York State of Fright, and various Girls Right Now anthologies. She's recently finished her second novel, Blood Mask, publishing date to be announced, which she'll be reading from tonight. So join me in welcoming Kathleen Scheiner.
Maggie, I hear Grandma yell, and she sounds frantic with lots of splashing. Maybe she's fallen, I think, and clunked down the hallway toward the bathroom. I look through the open door and see Grandma naked in the tub with not enough bubbles to cover her crotch and breasts. What do you need? I ask, trying to look anywhere else but at her. I want to see how you look in the outfit, she says, and pops her tongue on the roof of her mouth. My, you look just like her. Like who? Your mother, that's who. My mother? I look down at what I'm wearing. These clothes belong to my mother? Grandma props her leg up on the lip of the bathtub. Why don't you come in here and help me? I give her a look. What? We're all girls, right? She says. My stomach tightens, but I come into the bathroom. I stare at my feet nervously and see that water's staining the pink silk of my slippers. Grandma points her long fingernail at a lady's pink razor and bottle of body wash on the floor beside the tub. Could you help me shape my legs? She pats her stomach, all puffed out like an apple. It's too hard for me to reach them anymore. Are you kidding me? Grandma dips her wash rag in the water and then wrings the excess out. She folds it in half and puts the rag over her eyes, like this gives her privacy or something. You know, your mother used to do anything for me, she says. There was a time when I had a waiting list to get into my dance studio. Your mother came to see me all the way from Ponca City, Oklahoma. She was desperate for me to teach her, offered to pay me double, even triple my usual rates. We were very close. I was even there when you were born, and she lost her mind. What? Grandma eases the wash rag up on her forehead, showing me her sharp blue eyes. She picks up a bath poof and says, Do you want to hear more? I know what she's asking for and take the net poof from her. She moves the wash rag down over her eyes and sinks back into the tub so I can see more of her leg with kinky gray hairs growing out of dark pores. I don't think she's shaved in years. I pick up the razor and body wash and sit on the closed seat of the toilet, then dip the poof in the water. I squeeze a dollop of the floral-scented bath wash on the poof and then lather up her leg. Tell me, I say as I start drawing the razor down her shin, tell me everything you know about my mother. Your ma had this idea that she was going to become a famous ballerina, just like Maria Tallchief, her being from Oklahoma and all. And she was so rich with so many outfits. Every day it seemed like she had a new outfit for class. The terrible thing is, she had no talent. She wasn't lazy. Oh no, she worked obsessively and was always in the studio, taking as many classes as she could from me, even extra private lessons on the weekends. She had the right body and look, but she couldn't move well. Too stiff and wooden. She couldn't hear the music. I'm careful not to nick Grandma as I make short strokes with the razor and get every one of those kinky gray hairs on her calf. I have to keep dipping the razor in the bath water to unclog the razor blade from all her long tangled hairs. I lather up the poof again and say, "Give me your other leg." "No, do the knee and thigh first." Her eyes are covered so she can't see my look of disgust. I dab at her knee and upper leg with the poof and start making short strokes again, but only on the knee. Is that how she met Daddy? She had her eye on him from day one in class. He was the best dancer, and I think she believed that if she was paired with him, her dancing would magically become better. She was a pretty little thing, I have to admit. Wouldn't wear her hair in a proper bun, but braided up in a coronet. And my son, your dad, well, he was smitten. I finish with her knee and rinse the razor in the water, then make a tentative reach toward her thigh. Grandma smiles. Your dad used to do this for me, shave my legs. I stop, the razor hanging in midair, my stomach feeling queasy. The gardenia aroma is overpowering in the small bathroom, and I really think I'm going to throw up. I swallow hard and get myself under control. I finally told her there was nothing I could do. She would improve no more in my studio. I could have taken her money forever, but I knew it wasn't fair. Grandma takes the wash rag off her eyes and sets it floating in the water. Come on, girl. Don't be shy. You want to hear how she got in the NYCB, not as a dancer, but in other ways. I nod and feel tears pricking my eyes. I always had an idea of my mother as the tortured artist, having to pick between her children and the muse. To find out she had no talent made my heart ache. Why did she leave us then? Grandma juts her leg out of the water even more, showing me so much white doughy flesh. I hold my breath and start to soap up her thigh. She got a job there as a janitor and figured she'd work her way up, then took my son with her to the city. How do you think that worked out? The razor clatters to the floor and I drop the poof in the water, feeling like I'm going to puke. My wrist is still outstretched over her thigh, where it creases into her belly, and Grandma runs her hand down her leg, sighing with satisfaction. I finally feel like myself. I've been thinking I'll get involved in dance again, open a little studio in Manhattan now that I've sold mine to Bernadette. I could lose a little weight and have you pose for ads. There's going to be so many little girls wanting to be you now. I could afford to only pick the best of the best. Why would I do that, I say, horrified by the idea of helping in any way so she could torture other young children. All the help I'm giving you, she coos. 2 detectives visited me in the hospital today, you know, wanting permission for tests and such. I told them it really wasn't a good idea right now, with your father being sick and all, that it might bring to light a certain family secret that I'm the sole keeper of. What are you talking about? Grandma fingers her right unshaved knee and points at the scarred kneecap. Finish what you started and I'll tell you, though I'm inclined not to. You'll owe me a favor after this, you know. I nod and tears blur my eyes. It feels like my stomach drops, like when I'm in the elevator and I fumble around on the bathroom floor to recover the pink razor, rinsing the hairs and soap out of it. I concentrate on dehairing the rest of her right leg. The razor's very dull right now, and it takes several passes before I can make some of those stubborn hairs disappear. Margot was born, and your daddy was prouder than any father could be, I suppose. That's back when I was allowed to come to the apartment for Sunday dinners, a time when we all got on. But then your mother got funny. She got it into her head that she'd hit her third wind, and with enough practice and studio time, she thought it possible that she could become a professional ballerina, though she was long in the tooth. 27. I know what Grandma's talking about. It might take a dancer until 30 to become a principal, but nobody starts a ballet company in their late 20s. It's unheard of. Grandma goes on, your mom would disappear for days at a time and come back with scratches all over her body, like she'd been running naked through briars. She was neglecting Margot, so I started staying over a few evenings to help your daddy. She was teething and fussy as hell. One night, I go into the kitchen and see your mom naked as a jaybird in front of the refrigerator, eating raw meat and cracking eggs into her mouth. Her stomach was round, though the rest of her was stick thin. I could tell she was pregnant again, but she hadn't said a word. I told her she could kill the baby eating like that. She refused to admit she was pregnant, right up to the day she went into labor. That was me, I say, dropping the razor into the bath water. The smell of the gardenias is heavy and cloying, tickling a memory from the past in these same bathroom walls. Oh, you betcha. She was barely speaking by then, and they had me come into the delivery room to act as a kind of translator, I guess. You came out the sorriest sight I ever did see. Like an alien with these big black eyes and a tail about 6 inches long, wriggling like a worm. Grandma barks laughter and it echoes off the tile walls. You're lying, I say. My eyes are green. Grandma drops her washcloth and studies me. Sometimes a baby's eyes change. Luckily, yours did, because you were the ugliest thing. The doctor held you up and your mama screamed. She's a monster, she yelled. She's a monster because I'm a monster. I shake my head furiously, and the nerves at the ends of my spine feel like they're twitching, looking for the tail they attach to. Grandma's wet, soggy hand drops out of the bathtub, touching the area of my back where I can feel those nerves. Right about there it was, she says, and I cringe under her hand. They operated, and there's a scar now, I imagine. But your mom didn't wait around to see that. They doped her up good, but in the middle of the night, she ripped her IV out and disappeared, never to be seen again. I think of the raised white scar on my lower back about the size of a 3-inch circle. Daddy said it was from when I pulled the coffee pot down on myself in the kitchen when I was little. I don't remember the incident, and neither does Margot, but that's what I always believed. I hustle out of the bathroom wanting to look at the scar by myself to see if it might be the base of a tail. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. That's pretty exciting. You know, I have to say, your story that took place in the apartment where the woman's hair grew and grew and grew, that was like my first experience with kind of body horror stuff. And so you're the one I think of when I think of that. And I think you're really tremendous at doing a physical exploration of the status of people to explore what they're thinking and doing. You know, you really, that's really touching. So would you call this story body horror, or is it just very explicit in terms of the description of the characters?
There are definitely parts of body horror. Yeah.
Okay.
That's my love.
Oh, that's really cool. That's very cool. So what has been interesting for you recently? Have you been doing a lot of reading of different things? Are you exploring different genres? What are you looking at?
Let's see, what have I been? Revising this novel so my agent can get ready to submit it in the spring. And then I'm working on a new project, so I'm very excited about that. I've got stories out for a couple of anthologies, and I picked up drawing again, and I'm enjoying that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, organizing my bookshelves by color, you know.
I noticed that. I was really impressed by that. That's way cool. Yeah, this guy behind me here, I got him for Halloween, and I decided to just leave him there for the rest of the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now when you go to look for a book, do you know where to find it? Do you remember the color that it is, or?
Yeah, actually I do. My friend's daughter was here. She was having her 23rd birthday here, and her friends were just so upset. It was like, why is Harry Potter in the Deathly Hallows there? It should be with the Harry Potters. She's like, no, it's orange. It makes sense. And yeah, usually when we're looking for something on our bookshelves, I know it by what the book looks like. It's like, oh, Motley Crue. It's got like that kind of whiskey brown color to the spine. And so I find it easier, actually.
Well, I'm old enough that I had albums, physical albums, and the big question among everybody, the big diversity, do you do it by genre or do you do it alphabetically by artist? So that was a big discussion that people would have late at night. So we have a question from Teal. He says, I know you do a lot of work with young writers. What drew you to that?
Definitely mentors that I've had early in my life. Your family's one thing when they're like, oh, this is great. But having somebody just point you out as special and say, hey, you've got it. You've got a place here. You can always do it. That meant something. And just made me work harder. I wanted to please them so much. So to be able to do that with other young girls, I want to give back.
And one of them is Girls Write Now with a W, and that was the group that we used our last anthology from HWA New York to benefit that group. So that was a cool thing.
They were so happy with it.
That's really cool. Another question from Linda Addison here. Do you do a lot of nonfiction research to inspire the realness of your chilling work?
Yeah. But usually the subjects I pick to work about, I pick to write about, I am fascinated by, so it doesn't hurt. It's not like, I don't know, looking up Bible passages or something. So, but I do a lot of research, waste a lot of time on the internet, just like going down a rabbit hole. Like, what did he ask for his last dinner before he was executed? And, things like that.
And, was that with gravy or not? Yeah, I wonder. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on and reading with us. This was hearing it in your voice is really cool too, because extra chilling. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Carol.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, I'm going to go ahead now and introduce our next reader, who is Patrick Freivald. Patrick is a 4-time Bram Stoker Award nominated author, a high school teacher for physics, robotics, and American Sign Language. He's a beekeeper specializing in hot pepper infused honey. He lives in Western New York with his beautiful wife, 3 parrots, 3 dogs, too many cats, and several million stinging insects. A member of the Horror Writers Association and the International Thriller Writers, he's always had a soft spot for slavering monsters of all kinds. He's the author of 8 novels and dozens of short stories, from hyper-violent, kick-ass thrillers and teen zombie melodramas to science fiction, horror, and fantasy. You can find him at patrick.freivald.com. He's on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and frogspointhoney.com. I'd like to introduce Patrick Freivald.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to read for you a story called A Creative Urge from my collection, In the Garden of Rusting Gods. And without further ado, tears streamed down Cassie's face as she smeared paint across the canvas with her bare hands. Bilious green covered the pond in the foreground, smothering the silhouette of children on swing sets and the craggy, vine-covered trees clawing at the sky behind them, obliterating a month's work under its unrelenting stain. She dipped her hand into another can, and it came up dark red like old blood. That red mingled with green in vicious slashes to form a muddy brown, the same muddy brown that covered the torn and broken canvases littering her studio floor. The urge to destroy is also a creative urge. Mikhail Bakunin's words gave her no succor as she tore the last of her portfolio from the easel and broke it across her knee. Smearing herself with more paint, mangled colors that already covered her t-shirt, shorts, bare feet, and every inch of her skin. Chest heaving, sweaty paint dripping from her eyes from tangles of paint-soaked hair, she finally collapsed to a sitting position on the floor. For a moment, all she could do was breathe, lightheaded, even hunger a memory of something some other her might feel. Before the accident, her last 4 paintings, all fields of flowers, had sold for a combined total of $28,000, almost matching the salary she earned as a science teacher at a prestigious but chronically underfunded charter school. After the accident, her next 3, still nature scenes but dark and haunted, had sold for $80,000. An up-and-coming hot property on the New York scene, she'd quit her job and rented a larger space, large enough to paint what she wished, when she wished, somewhere she didn't have to share with roommates, and with a lover only if she wanted to. She didn't want to. It didn't make the slightest bit of sense that someone could be there one moment and not be there the next. Love and light and warmth replaced by a broken doll of cold meat and cracked bone. They'd caught the man that had killed Tess, convicted him of manslaughter on a suspended license after 3 DWIs, sentenced him to 10 years in prison, 10 years to pay for a lifetime. And it had done nothing to bring her back. Life held no closure, only endings. The ability to pinpoint the moment her mind had slipped didn't make Cassie feel any better. After the call, she'd insisted on seeing the body, barging past her unwilling and hostile mother-in-law to kiss those cold, bloody lips one last time, to slip the ring from her wife's finger and put it on her own until death did them part. She grieved, and how she'd grieved, but she hadn't broken. No, that came later. During the trial, she'd insisted on looking at the crime scene photographs, digital images of red blood on green grass, where Steve Barrington's SUV had hit Tess at 70 miles an hour, throwing her mangled body from the sidewalk into the park. Cassie knew every curve of that body, had more than once peeled the sunshine yellow jogging suit from it, but in that misshapen mass she recognized none of her love. And yet, a knife of familiarity stabbed behind her eye at the twisted lines and unnerving curves that had once been her Tessie's limbs. A body couldn't lie like that, not in the Euclidean world, not in a universe where colors were merely spectral frequencies interpreted by primates who'd outgrown the jungle, where shapes defined a three-dimensional space of real things. A body couldn't take that shape, and a mind couldn't see it, not without a slip, a fracture, a bending of what is to accommodate what had to become. Such a shape could not exist, not in human form, not in any form. But it did right there in full color, on glossy print too flat to encompass that terrible form. Cassie knew that shape with the deepest part of her being, and despite the months since, it would not let her go. The shape ate her dreams, turning every waking moment into a nightmare of need. To see it again, to never see it again, to think about it always and never. That moment, that glimpse of the picture before the detective had hidden it away, had stolen her capacity for joy and love, kidnapped her muse, and replaced both with a need she didn't understand. The urge to create is also a destructive urge. She stumbled into the pile of canvases, knocking them aside with her legs, and fell to her hands and knees. Scrabbling through them, she found a dry one she'd ruined days before, back when she still ate, before she'd run out of booze, before her phone had died and taken with it her link to the world outside her apartment. She wiped paint from her hands onto her shirt and picked it up, adding fingerprint smudges to the edge as she set it on the easel. Streaks of red and green melded through the dark brown substrate, whirls and streaks that were at least possible whirls and streaks. Far too possible. With a trembling hand, she picked up a brush and a pot of canary yellow paint, almost the same color as her wife's jogging suit. She dipped the brush and pulled back with a hiss. A bead of red blood formed across the inside of her thumb where she'd cut it on the lid. Another her, one from another life, she might have sucked the blood from the injury, applied a Band-Aid, perhaps an antibiotic ointment. Instead, this her, the new her, the her who couldn't unsee that abominable shape, gripped the brush and let the blood run in rivulets down her forearm and across her fingers. Tess's shattered body screamed through the void, guiding Cassie's hand as it slashed across the canvas, painting streaks and bends in too many dimensions to mimic the broken form her murderer had left on the grass. Cassie's blood trickled down the brush and spotted the canvas. She attacked it with the bristles, melding it with the yellow to create a cacophony of hues from deep ochre to bright sunshine and everything in between. Layer built upon layer as the sun set in ambers and slept, then rose blood red to the sounds of distant church bells and set again under stars that blazed blue-white, until at last Cassie stumbled back and fell to her knees, eyes locked on the dark majesty of her creation. The yellow glyph blazed from the canvas like the moon. No, as the moon, and somehow stretching up to and beyond that moon stood jagged spires that reached into an infinite midnight sky, a great crystalline city formed complete from whirls of dark red and green and brown. A city she had no memory of painting. In such a city, lovers could shatter into impossible tangles of flesh and bone, yet live still to shed their moonlight, and under such moonlight could dark between creatures raise their haunted voices in dissonant, piteous praise of a master that knew no pity. In such a city, a spouse could die, yet become the moon. Cassie reached forward as if to touch the moon that was her wife, and her eyes widened in wonder. Her fingers took on a pallid gleam, not from the windows, not from the incandescent bulbs hanging from the ceiling, but from the moon glyph's soft glow. She basked in her wife's cool mystery, arms dotted with goose pimples from a breeze off of the lake. A thought seized her, wonderful and terrible and inevitable. Towers, so high they touch the moon. Dark waters, before unseen and also unpainted, lapped the cracked rocky shores of the impossible city, yellow moonlight also flickering from those moving waves, Tessie shimmers in an eternal dappled dance. From that shore, a faint breeze carried the taste of salt and blood and the faint, nose-wrinkling memories of dead fish and rotting seaweed. With that breeze on her skin, the scent of the ancient shore in her lungs, she closed her eyes and crawled through. Water, too hot and so cold, covered her hands and knees, lapped at her thighs and elbows, soaked her clothes and weighed her down. It caressed her, called to her, gently tugging at her sweatshirt, offered her sweet sleep under its glossy surface. But that surface reflected the moon. With murmured thanks for the offer, she shed her wet clothing and stepped into the shore, let the wind bringing goosebumps to her pale, paint-smeared skin. The water's cooed disappointment drowned under the lap of waves. Jagged rocks pricked at her feet, cut them as she crossed dark crystal shards, some as large as swords, most ground to fine sand. Wet footprints tinged red with smeared brushstrokes behind her as she approached the great clutching spires, taller than the tallest of mountains, taller than the heavens. She turned from them to look up at the spires. Taller than the moon. My moon. Between creatures carried their shadows with them as they slinked from building to building, watching her approach with chittering anticipation. She walked and walked for unknown hours, hours and days, as the curve of the earth revealed more and more of the city below the horizon. When at last she got close enough that the impossible city met the ground, the between creatures sang to her shrill notes no human voice could sing, Riemann harmonies no human mind could hold, dancing in prime-numbered time signatures, hard warnings and soft blessings in a language she didn't understand. She hummed to them in her own rough way, too human, too real, and yet they heard her and sniffed the air and came to her. They offered their hands, as jagged and broken as the rocks that had shredded her calloused, scarred feet so long ago. Cloaked in shadow and tipped with shining black claws, their hard fingers dripped a silky venom that twinkled with unlight. She took those offered hands, ran her soft fingers across their roughness, touched her fingers to her tongue to taste their poison, bittersweet like honey and turpentine. It burned her throat, brought a rough edge to her song, and they sang it with her. They took her hands again and led her forward into the city, and then up and up, always higher toward that soft yellow light. Where there were stairs or ladders leading upward or bridges across the black chasms between spires, she took them, and where there were not, she made them, painting them with her mind in reds and greens and browns, in her quest to reach the moon that was her love. Bright blue stars birthed and died, born and reborn from the nuclear ashes of their ancestors, an endless ballet without rhyme or purpose, casting metals through the void, to live and die in an endless dance of birth and death and heavier, explosive rebirth. Yet in those strange aeons, the sun never rose, never set, never dared show its face, never dared hide her love, the moon. And the moon, her moon, never moved, never once yielded its place in the sky. Yellow paint dripped from it to spatter across the gantries and bridges and towers of the silent city, Tessa's broken light swallowed by the darkness that could not be satiated, even as it dripped across Cassie's bridges and staircases, even as it dribbled into the dark, hungry seas that surrounded the impossible city. But still the moon dripped, and never did its paint light wane. She climbed, and the between things climbed with her, and as they climbed, her body withered, skin stretched tight over bone and gristle and desiccated muscle, organs drying and crumbling to nothing, yet still full of glorious, unending purpose. It didn't matter. She could still walk, still paint, still climb. And how she climbed. The between creatures sang to her their impossible songs while she climbed, and as the aeons passed, she learned them, joined their harmonies with her own, singing their song to the moon, her broken love, dripping its yellow light across broken spires and breaking waves. Again and again she reached for it with shadow-cloaked claws, dripping silky black venom that twinkled with unlight, her straining voice keening with the need for one more touch, one more embrace, one more kiss of her lover's yellow light. And there you go.
Thank you, Patrick. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
I had my mic muted for some reason.
I saw that. Or heard that.
Or didn't hear that. Yes, exactly. So is the first publication of that story in Garden of the Rusting Gods?
Yeah, I wrote that very specifically for the collection. I wanted to have a mix of already published stories as well as unpublished stories. So yeah, I had no intention of publishing that outside of Rusting Gods.
Okay.
At least not first. If someone wants to buy it again, I'll let them.
Of course, new money for old rope.
Exactly.
So how many original stories are in that collection?
About a half a dozen.
Oh, okay. So that's a lot of new work.
Yeah, it's a healthy mix of things that I had already published and things that had not been published.
Excellent. All right. So we do have some questions for you from the audience. I'm going to go straight to Megan Arcuri. And I should just, for a little context, Patrick is a teacher. And so he has many students who probably don't know Mr. Freivald writes crazy stories at first when they meet him.
Yeah, it's pretty well known in the town. I mean, I teach in a very, very small town. Our school, the K through 6 enrollment number is really easy to remember at the moment. It's 666. So 666 kids total for the town of 58 square miles. So pretty much everybody knows that I do write horror. Some students do, a lot of parents do, and sometimes that can get awkward because some of my stories are pretty twisted. But just today, I suddenly started getting Facebook messages this morning from a kid. I'm like, who is this? It's a 12-year-old in the 6th grade who read my young adult stuff and started pestering me with questions today. So I wouldn't say a lot of my students do, but certainly some do, absolutely. The general reaction ranges a lot from, ooh, that was great, to what is wrong with that guy? So it really depends. The reaction can depend a lot both on what they read as well as how they interpret what they read, I guess.
Right. Well, that's good. I'm glad that the sixth grader was reading your YA stuff. I was afraid for a moment there you were going to say he read something like Murmur or...
That would be bad.
Yes, that would be bad.
Not
for sixth graders.
I did have a parent ask, oh, should I buy Murmur for Murmur for my daughter? And she was turning, I think, 14 or something. And I was like, I don't think this book is appropriate for adults. And she laughed, and then she said, so that's a no. And I said, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I said, at least read it first and then make up your own mind. And she read it and said, yeah, absolutely not. So
okay. And
that's fine.
Good call. Yeah. So now you mentioned, or we mentioned in your bio, that you write in a lot of different genres. And Teal would like to know, I guess, how you define your work at the heart of it. Is there a core to your work that transcends the different genres you work in, or do you just kind of move from one thing to the next?
The heart of my work is like, you know those little kids' toys where you push them and all the balls go pop, 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 pop? That's going on in my brain. And whatever ball happens to pop up to the top, I'm like, ooh, shiny, and I write that. I really don't have a core... a lot of what I write tends to be very dark, go figure. Even my straight up sci-fi and fantasy tend to be dark. But beyond a general kind of twistedness, I don't really have a core. I usually write with a lot of irony, which is funny because a lot of the time people don't necessarily get it. They'll do a straight read of one of my stories and say, hey, that was great. And my response is always, yay, I'm glad you liked it. And But aside from oftentimes having either characters or situations that you shouldn't be rooting for or you shouldn't be comfortable with as an element to it, I wouldn't say I necessarily have some great unifying subgenre.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have a question for you. What does it take for you to decide it's time to sit down and write a story? A lot of authors will talk about having a character in mind or an opening scene that's very clear, or a plot. Is there a particular element of writing that has to be there before you will start putting the words in place?
In terms of short stories, I'm an obsessive plotter with my novels and a total pantser with my short stories, but that's not quite true, because in both cases, I really have to know the ending. The ending of a story is the point, right? And I know a lot of people write as the journey. And for me, if a story has something to say, I know what that story wants to say before I start writing it. And to do that, I need to know where it's going, sometimes not necessarily how it's getting there. And then I can shape both the language I use and the characters and the situations to help emphasize and distill the core of whatever I'm trying to get at.
Okay, great. So you really have to have that before you can sit down and get serious.
Yeah, and I think only once ever have I been surprised by the ending of a story, where I started to write it and it took a severe left turn and I was like, oh, I guess we're going over there. That is, I think, once ever has that happened for me. Almost always it's straight up. Do you feel like you have a lot of control over the story as you write it, or do you find even if you get to the expected ending, your characters sometimes take you in different places, or new ideas kind of bring you off course? Yeah, I have a lot of control over the story as I write it, but I have very little control over the story when it pops into my brain.
Okay.
So, like, when it goes, the story is about this, and this is, the general meat of it, I don't really have any control over. That's inspiration. And then honing that into the story is all perspiration.
Got it. All right. Well, Patrick, thanks so much for the reading. We're going to move on to Lee, and we'll come back to you at the end of the program when we have everybody jump on to talk some more.
Bye.
All right. So thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. Once again, please put your questions in the chat. Our next reader is Lee Murray. Lee is a multi-award winning author editor from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And she has received or been nominated for the Sir Julius Vogel and Australian Shadows Award, I think. Lee, you can correct me if I've gotten any of this wrong. And she's a 3-time Bram Stoker Award nominee. Her work includes military thrillers, the Tane McKenna Adventures, supernatural crime noir series The Path of Ra with Dan Rabarts, and her debut collection, Grotesque Monster Stories. Her latest anthology projects are Black Cranes, Tales of Unquiet Women, co-edited with Genevieve Flynn, and Midnight Echo No. 15. She is the co-founder of Young New Zealand Writers and of the Wright Murray Residency for Speculative Fiction Writers. Lee has been HWA Mentor of the Year, an NZSA Honorary Literary Fellow, and is a Grimshaw Sargison Fellow for 2021. Read more at leemurray.info. And without further ado, welcome to Lee.
Oh, Lou, that intro. I just want to keep watching it. It's so good. Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to read from Grotesque, from Into the Clouded Sky, which is a Tane McKenna novella, which I wrote specifically for this book. I'm going to read 2 little sections of 5 minutes each. The first one is kind of creative nonfiction, because all of the characters and the elements in this story are drawn entirely from historical archives. And the second is also part of the story, the second 5 minutes of reading, and it's drawn entirely from my true imagination. So, Into the Clouded Sky. Lake Rotomahana, 31st of May, 1886. Louise Sighs grasped her daughter by the waist. Frances, full of youthful carelessness and with a personality as buoyant as her curls, had leaned over the side of the boat and was dangling a slender finger in the lake. "Not too close, my darling," Louise said, pulling the girl gently backwards onto the wooden seat. "It isn't safe." Frances pouted, but, a sweet child at heart, she remained on the bench as Louise asked. It was as well, for they were moving swiftly now, the dark water skimming beneath the boat's hull. Although the lake looked smooth, it could be fickle and treacherous. Not half an hour ago, when their tour party had been setting out from the township of Te Wairoa, the tides had surged and heaved as if some unseen monster had sighed and turned over in its sleep on the lake bed. The waves had coursed so far up the shoreline that the whaleboat lifted off the beach on the unexpected swell. The men who were to row them to their destination had been afeared, their brows coming together and their dark eyes flashing with alarm. They took to chattering, 2 of them even refusing to get in the craft. Given their consternation, Louise had asked her husband whether they should not have been better to delay their tour. "Nonsense," George had said. "These Maoris are too suspicious by half." The sudden sesh was merely a trick of the lake, he assured her, caused by the overactive thermal rifts the lake was famed for, the same forces that had bestowed the region with the shimmering pink and white terraces, and the very reason they had travelled to the region. Louise had yielded to his better judgment. As a partner of Dunedin's Messrs. Bate, Sighs and Co., and a director of Donaghy's Rope and Twine, George employed plenty of natives in his enterprises, and he knew a great deal about these things. Thankfully, their guide, by force of her confidence, had cajoled the Maoris to row them to the southern end of the lake as planned. Laughing loudly at the men's reticence, she had picked up the oars and thrust them into their hands, her demeanour as certain as the huia feather poked in her hair. Eventually, the natives got into the whaleboat and readied themselves to row, although not without some grumbling. "What are they saying?" Louise demanded. While she'd lived in Maoriland most of her life, leaving Prussia with her mother as a child, she spoke not a word of the natives' language. Her husband was more proficient. "Saying something about only dying once," George said, "so they may as well die together." "That's not very reassuring," Louise said. George placed his hand on the small of her back and helped her into the boat. "No one's going to die, Louise." And he'd been right. Before long, they had left the capricious tides behind them, the oarsmen's blades flicking through the water with barely a splash. The men's necks gleamed with sweat, and the air tingled with the musk of adventure. Mount Tarawera towered alongside them, the mountain's misshapen shoulders dark brown against the clear blue skies. Louise breathed deeply, taking a gulp of sulphurous winter air. All at once, Frances pointed across the lake. "Look, Mother," she said. Louise twisted on the bench. Emerging from beneath a massive pine was an old Maori war canoe, ghostly in the light morning mist. Longer than the whaleboat, with 2 rows of seats, ornately carved prows graced each end of the canoe. The craft was full of Maoris, some standing up, and was near enough for Louise to see the sun glitter on their paddles. The warriors, 9 of them, wore flaxen robes and feathered headdresses. Their chief, on his feet, brandished a carved spear. It was a magnificent sight, though Louise hurried to avert Frances's young eyes, since the warriors in the canoe were almost naked. The Maoris rowing the whaleboat shouted and whistled. The newcomers paid them no heed. "Who are they?" asked Mrs. Ralph, the doctor's wife. "Just some local men heading out to catch some kura crayfish," the guide said, although her brow furrowed in a squint. "They're racing us," George noted. For several miles, the 2 boats kept up their parallel course. The whaleboat rowers were rattled. They glanced over their shoulders apprehensively and hauled harder and harder on their oars, desperate to pull away from the canoe. Unperturbed, George wondered about the canoe's destination. "What's over there at the foot of the mountain?" he asked. "A Maori burial ground," the guide replied. That same moment, she drew in a breath and her eyes widened. "What is it?" George asked. "In the ghost canoe," she whispered. "Don't you see? The warriors have dogs' heads on the bodies of men." Louise whirled to look, but the canoe had disappeared, obscured by the headlands. George snorted. "Did I miss something?" Dr. Ralph asked. Gazing through his spyglass at the birds on the eastern bank, the doctor hadn't remarked on the canoe at all. "Just a canoe," George said. The tour group continued to the famous cascading silica terraces, which were even more wonderful and breathtaking than the reports. Louise decided the whaleboat returning to Tawaira in the late afternoon. Louise looked for the canoe on their return journey, but apart from the dip and lift of oars and the soft grunts of the natives, the lake was quiet. That night, in the dining room, over their meal of crayfish and potatoes, their hosts, Mr. and Mrs. McRae, insisted that no such canoe existed on the lake. Well, that led to plenty of conjecture by the guests after that, the mystery of the strange canoe entertaining them long into the evening. Then days later, when Louise and George and Francis were well away from the region and on their way back to Dunedin, the mountain erupted, spewing mud and ash for miles and miles. Not since Maui had fished the kingdom from the ocean using his mother's jawbone had the land seen such violence, people said. Louise sent up a prayer for their good fortune to be away from the region, as everyone residing nearby had been killed, buried alive, and the stunning terraces, eighth wonder of the world, were lost from view. So that's the real bit, and now I'm going to get to the imaginary bit, which is also real. So this is also at Lake Rotomahana in the present day, except it's under the lake because there's been an earthquake. And my hero, Sergeant Tane McKenna, a Maori Irish sergeant in the New Zealand Defence Forces, and his corporal, Lefty Wright, are there with 3 Waikato University geography researchers. So they've been trapped under the lake after a quake. There are some swear words, sorry. What the fuck was that? Blake said. I don't know, sounded like a dying animal, Josh said, taking a step backwards. Maybe we should look for another route. There is no other route, Josh. Lefty moved to join Tane at the rear, the beam of his cell phone's flashlight reflecting off the walls. Either we go forward, he pointed back down the tunnel, or we go back to the cavern and wait for the water level to rise and drown us. Guys, we're letting the situation get to us. Noises get exaggerated in tunnels. Right, McKenna? Blake said, hopefully. The guttural roar came again, resonating in Tane's bones. Louder this time, it was accompanied by a higher-pitched clatter, which might have been a rockfall. Jeepers, if I didn't know better, I'd guess we were trapped down here with a very pissed-off mountain lion, Rob said, one hand on the lumpy lava wall. Maybe even 3 or 4 of them. There are no mountain lions in New Zealand, Blake said. Well, maybe it's Smorg and a bunch of fucking elves then, Rob said. That doesn't sound natural to me. Lefty glanced at Tane and raised an eyebrow. They'd had some experience with the unnatural, in the mists of the Te Urawera forest, for example. More than likely it's a distortion, Tane said, a smaller sound exaggerated by the tunnel. Still, we should stay on alert. It could be the lava crust is thinner here. What we're hearing might be water or lava flowing just beyond the walls. We don't want to step into a surprise if we come across a breach somewhere. Let's go in single file. Lefty, you okay to take point? Lefty gave a curt nod. On it, boss. He turned to go, but Tane grabbed him by the arm. Wait. His back to the civilians, Tane reached into his waistpack and whipped out his fishing knife. Here, he said, in case of mountain lions. Taking the knife, Lefty grinned. Then he moved to the front of the group, and they proceeded up the tunnel towards the source of the noise. No one spoke. After a while, the roar died out. They continued. 15 minutes passed. 20. McKenna, Lefty called quietly. Tane hurried to the front. The path divided into 2 tunnels, one wider and brighter. In fact, its walls were so translucent it was as if the wider tunnel had been carved out of giant blocks of sugar. If they were to take that one, they would barely need a light, but the slope was all wrong and would plunge them deeper into the earth. The other channel was narrower and darker, but climbed steeply. Which way? Lefty asked. We should go up, Blake said quickly. The surface has to be above us. That's true, Josh said, shining his phone torch left and right from one tunnel entrance to the next and back again. But descent here doesn't mean the route won't eventually lead us to the surface. The passage out of the cavern sloped down initially, but we still ended up climbing. What about the noise we heard earlier? Blake interrupted. We should head away from that sound. We haven't heard it for a while, and for all we know, it could have come from either of these tunnels, Rob said. It was probably a rockfall, like McKenna said. I say we go left. Look at these walls. They've got to be 60% silica. I think there's a good chance the terraces are somewhere near here, and if I'm going to die in this God-forsaken hole, then I want to see the 8th wonder of the world before I go. McKenna? Lefty asked. Tane strained his ears for the rasping wail. Every neuron in his body was screaming for caution, but the tunnels were quiet, giving him no reason to choose one over the other. Left it is, then, he said. Lefty led off, taking the wider descending tunnel, and Tane slipped back to the rear of the group. 100 metres on, the tunnel widened even further, and air took on a faint sulphurous tinge. Tane hoped it was a sign they were nearing the source of the volcanic vent. One good thing, the walls were so luminescent they no longer needed their phone torches, which should spare the batteries for when they reached the surface, assuming they found their way out. They rounded a corner and entered a cavern the size of a school classroom, another tunnel entrance on the far side. Lefty started. He raised his arm. In the middle of the cavern, its shoulders grazing the roof, was Tane had no idea what the hell it was. It was a wonder they hadn't walked right into it. The thing was as translucent as a ghost, almost invisible against the luminescent walls. It was a statue, down here under the earth. How was that possible? Is that thing real? Josh asked, stepping off to one side to examine the structure better. Seems we're not the first people to have walked these tunnels, Rob breathed. That's a human effigy. Which means we must be close to the surface, Blake said. Tane shook his head. Something felt off. Maybe it was just a coincidence that the shape looked human. Wishful thinking. They'd been down here for hours now. Maybe they were just looking for some sign that their ordeal would soon be over. All at once, the statue turned in their direction, the scrape and rasp of its limbs, slow and deliberate, and the sound of its movement, eerily familiar. There you go.
Wow, that's so exciting. Now I want to know what happens next. Cool.
That's the idea, isn't it,
Yes,
from a reading?
it really is. I have to say, the first book that I read of yours was Into the Mist, which is, of course, one of the Tame McKenna adventure series. And it was so much fun because you're out in the wild in this area that I had never been before, and you made it feel so real.
Oh,
you know?
thank you.
Yes, I'm delighted there's another one of these out. That's really cool. Well, I'm not the only one who likes the monsters. We have a question from Nicholas Dyack, who asks, if you could get the license for any monster IP out there, from Godzilla to the Thing in Cloverfield, anything, what monster would you want McKenna to fight?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question. I think he's really done it. I think the Taniwha, the New Zealand Taniwha, is the monster. It's our monster. It's our most famous monster. So I think he's already done it. But I have this idea that there's something killing our New Zealand kauri trees. They're like redwoods. They're huge, and they only live here in New Zealand. And there's something killing them, and I think Tane might be heading up to see what that might be about. So we'll wait and see what that turns out to be.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, we can't wait to find out. Yeah. Well, we have two similar questions. One is from Teal, which is very cool. He says, you're very connected to your heritage, but which came first, that connection or the need to write? Or were they always intertwined?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I think it sort of harks back to the question that was asked of Patrick. You know, how do you define yourself as a writer? What's your genre? And to me, I'm a New Zealand writer. So, you know, I draw my stories from from around me, from my heritage and my culture and the landscape. And so for me, it's very, I mean, yes, I write some stories in other places that I visited and that kind of thing, but really my storytelling is all about, you know, where I'm born and where I've lived and what I've experienced. So I think we do that, don't we? We draw a lot on what we know. So, you know, this is you know, this is my home, and so that's where I draw my inspiration from. So yeah, I guess it's it's to do with where I come from first, I think, and the writing to tell those stories has been important, and so yeah, the writing is possibly secondary. I hadn't really thought about that, but yeah.
Well, maybe one pulls the other along, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of chicken and egg, isn't it?
Yeah, that's cool. Actually, Linda Addison had a similar observation and had a question for us. She says, I love the inclusion of Maori and et cetera in your collection. Have you had feedback from native New Zealand people to your stories?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, some people think I am Maori, which is really
Oh.
interesting. So that's really flattering for me. But yes, actually, and I always get my stories sensitivity tested before I put them out, because obviously, you know, cultural appropriation sort of issues, and you might want to make sure that you're not treading on any toes.
Yes.
Because as I always say, you know, one person's religion is one person's faith is one person's myth is another person's faith. So it's very it's a fine line, isn't it? So you do have to be very careful and sensitive about how you write things. So.
Well, that's cool. And respect is the important thing, right?
Yeah. And I think that the other thing that's really interesting about writing New Zealand stories is that James said it earlier about horror being so broad, and I think for New Zealanders, what frightens us is really different from what might frighten other people. So for us here living on the shaky isles, where you get an earthquake every 10-15 minutes, and you never know when the big one's going to happen.
Yeah.
This kind of thing is just so it's pervasive in our writing, and things like climate change and that really significant here. So when you're an island nation and the tide's coming up, and some houses on our coasts are not getting insured because they're getting washed into the ocean, and so so the things that frighten us depends on your culture a lot, doesn't it? And your location. So a lot of my stories kind of tap into those sorts of fears, which perhaps are a little different from traditional horror that you see elsewhere.
I got to spend a month in Tokyo, and all of the folks who lived there and worked in the office were laughing at all of the New Yorkers because an earthquake happened, and they were all watching us to see how we reacted. And that was the only time I had felt something like that. So I having felt that then, though, I can just picture the difference, of every day.
Yeah, it's interesting because New Zealand children learn how to, stop, drop, and hold in the same way maybe that, American children do sort of active shooter training, that kind of thing. So the things that frighten us are different, depending on where you live. So.
And it's natural as opposed to something else, perhaps. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. We had another question from Brian that you touched on a little bit before, though. He's asking that you've written horror, sci-fi, and military stories. Do you prefer one genre over the others? You've said that you're inspired by your location, of course, and you're connected to that. But out of the different things you've written, do you prefer one?
No, I just like what I'm writing at the moment. I especially like it when I'm getting paid to write something. That's always really nice. Yeah. So when I have a story commissioned and someone says, here's an idea, and you go away and here's a theme, and you go away and think up the idea, and when you're going to get paid at the end of it, that's always very inspiring. But in terms of one genre over the other, no, I like to mix and match, and I'm trying some poetry now, so we'll see how that goes. And yeah, I think so long as I'm challenged and trying to extend my techniques and skills, then I always find that exciting.
And can you tell us a little bit about your fellowship? The Grimshaw Sargison is apparently a very prestigious thing, from what I understand. Not living in the Tell us about it.
Thank you. I'm really excited about it. It's a real coup because speculative writers don't earn get residencies, and they don't earn stipends here in New Zealand. I mean, this was my 43rd application, so it's been a long time coming, but I'm super excited. I'm going to be looking at the New Zealand Chinese diaspora as through poem, and I'm looking at through the fox, the Asian mythology of the fox spirit in the story, and the poetry collection's called Fox Spirit on a Distant Cloud, because New Zealand is called the land of the long white cloud. I'm so excited about it. I'm telling everybody. It's a bit experimental, so I'm quite nervous. But and that includes 4 months living in Auckland. They put me up in a in a little apartment there, and I'll be able to be part of the Auckland community. So yeah, really, really exciting. It's nice to have, again, be paid to write. So that's just
nice.
such a privilege. So yeah, I'm really, really excited about it.
And things are a little bit more clear for you in your country for COVID. So this is not a worry for you. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Well, you know, I still have to be able, you know, everything we plan now, we still have to plan for our COVID lockdown. So we have to have a COVID contingency plan like everybody else. But yeah, I'm off on holiday just as soon as I'm off this call, and we're not wearing any masks, and it's just we're so lucky. We don't have to social distance. We just have to, you know, keep a track of where we are and who we're with, and you know, that's not a hardship given what everyone else is living. So we're so lucky here. We really are.
You know, my last question before we bring everybody back to chat for a few minutes, the Black Cranes anthology. I absolutely love this. Every time I read one of the stories, I read it and I put it down and I have to go think about it for a while. And each individual story is really cool, but all together, the power in that, yes. Can you tell us
Thank you so much.
What was the inspiration for putting this together? I know you have a number of collaborators.
Oh, look, I met Genevieve Flynn when I was a guest of honor at GenreCon in Brisbane the year before last now. So the end of in 2019, and I knew of her, but I'd never actually met her. And it was really hilarious because two Asian girls, we turned up early for a panel presentation because, you know, conscientious Asian girls always do the extra work and do the extra reading beforehand. So we were like 15 minutes early. And so we got chatting about, you know, the fact that we were Asian girls and arrived too soon. And then we said, well, where are the other Asian girls? You know, where are the other Asian writers of horror? And suddenly the idea was, you know, spawned, if you like. And we really realized that there was this massive gap in the literature. And so, yeah, so that kind of, I spoke to Kate Jones of Omnium Gatherum, and she said, yes, we need to do this. And within about 15 minutes of me sending the email, she wrote back and said, yes. So super exciting. And it has been received so well. I'm so proud of it. Just so proud. It's been wonderful working with these people. They've been fabulous.
Well, and I just want to share something from the chat. Angela Eureka Smith, who has a story in the anthology, says,
True story.
Highlight of my night, I've heard Lee Murray use profanity. And Linda Addison points out that you make it sound classy, so that's cool. Yeah.
With this little Kiwi accent. Oh, how funny.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming and reading and
Thank you for having
sharing
me.
some of your thoughts with us. This is so much fun. You know, Jim, how about if we have everybody else come in with us and we can chat a little bit more?
Sounds great. All right, we'll bring everybody on, and I definitely have a comment for Kathleen.
Uh-oh.
I was enjoying your background while you were reading. I was looking at that background and trying to figure out what possible classification system could put Black Hole by Charles Burns right next to a very well-used copy of the Webster's Dictionary.
Did you figure it out?
Well, you said it. You answered. You said that I couldn't figure it out. No. So I was glad you explained it. But I'm looking at that going, either Kathleen really likes to read that Black Hole graphic novel very often because it's right next to her dictionary, or so I don't know. I was mystified. But thank you, all of you, for such awesome readings tonight. I enjoyed them. It was great to have you here tonight and share your stories with us. And thanks for talking about writing. We'd certainly love to know what you have coming up next. So why don't we go back in order, and we'll turn to Stephen, and if you could give us a little bit of a preview as to what you have coming up.
As everybody has probably figured out by now, the sequel to Hell at the Way Station, Hell at Brooklyn T, is just about to drop. And then sometime after that, I actually have an anthology that's benefiting the NAACP. I'm still pulling that together. So that's happening. Of course, like I said, the sequels to Brookwater's Curse and Killer Genius, those series are still being built upon. And I got a bunch of other short stories landing in a few other places. And the last thing I'll throw out there is that, as some of you know, I have been doing some scripts for an animated history series Extra credit. After George Floyd was murdered, they realized they wanted to try to start, bringing in some Black history stuff. I've been working on that with them. 3 of them have already come out. There's like another 6 that are going to land sometime around Black History Month. And I'm really excited about that. And that's pretty much it.
Stephen, where can people find those?
Extra credit. They're a YouTube channel. So yeah, basically like Extra Credit, Extra History. You get into YouTube and search through any of that, and you'll find all that stuff. And they cover everything, like, from ancient Rome to the crucifixion. I had to actually write one episode for them. It was like the history of the Easter egg. So they're all over the place. So yeah,
they're deceptive because they have a really fun cartoon style to them, but those are really well researched pieces. Yeah, everybody who writes those, and you included, do their homework for those, so they're really interesting.
Oh yeah, it takes a lot of work.
All right, Kathleen, what is coming up for you? Anything new and exciting?
Lots of exciting things. Well, I'm finishing revisions to Blood Mask, and then my agent's going to be submitting it in the spring, so I'm very excited about that. I've been working on this for a couple of years. I'm starting a new project right now about rats, and so doing lots of research on rats and drawing them. And then something that I've been wanting to do for a while is I like to draw. I have an art background, and I also edit a lot of graphic novels. I'd really love to put together a graphic novel, and I think this might be the project. So. Oh, and I've got a couple things coming out in anthologies, but they're kind of secret, I think. I can't mention the title yet.
Very cool. Lots going on. Did you ever find that documentary about rats we talked about a while back?
I did. It was so good.
Wasn't it great?
All your rat suggestions.
I just want to share that I went to Willard Elementary School as a child.
Carol. Carrot.
And then my kids did too, X years later. Cool, huh?
Yes.
Cool. Patrick, how about you? What's on the front burners?
Most of what I'm involved with right now involves being a teacher in COVID land. So writing has been very largely on the back burner lately, but my agent has a couple of books. One is young adult fantasy. One is a very dark fantasy, actually, Jim, that you beta read. And one is sci-fi. What I'm actually working on right now is a very, very far future hard sci-fi mosaic novel. And it's, I know how it's going to end, but there's a lot of getting there that I've had some issues with. I've been working on that longer than anything else ever for about almost 2 years so far. So, but I think it's going to be pretty cool when it's done. And other than that, I've kind of auditioned for a work for hire thing for a YA series that I can't really talk about, and I should find out in the next week or so if they pick me up. But so far, it looks really good, and we'll see what happens on that front.
Awesome. Any new brewings on the honey side of things?
No, not really. I've got my hot honey and my rubs, and they sold really, really well over Christmas, and that was nice because I can, as Lee says, it's always nice to get paid, right? And so that was a nice bonus, and they're still going. So there's nothing dramatically new, but it's a nice little side gig.
Cool.
As you know, of course, I sent a box of that to my son and his fiance for a Christmas present, and man, they loved it. They loved the amusing titles of the rubs, and they also loved the honey and stuff. It was great. They said wonderful things.
We should get Lee to read the rub titles.
Oh, really?
That's good.
My first rub was called Rub It, and then the mild version is Rub It Gently, and the extra spicy is Rub It Harder. So.
Oh, okay.
my son asked me, "Are those intended to be?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "I thought so." Yeah.
Very funny. And Lee, I hope I didn't mangle the pronunciation of Aotearoa.
Aotearoa? No, you didn't do too badly.
All right, thank you. We're not too bad. So, and I guess we heard a little bit about your poetry project that's coming up. Do you have any other writing projects in the works?
some short stories coming. The poetry isn't until the second half of the year, so I have a little bit of time to get some things underway. I'll have one of the youth anthologies to edit. This I do one every year, so this is the decade now that I've been doing it, so that'll be coming up in a couple of months' time. And I have all the reading to do for the speculative fiction residency as well, so there'll be a lot of reading to do there. Yeah, I have some things in the work with Angela, actually. So I need to get my little bottom into gear, and because I'm a very slow writer, unfortunately, and I have lots of grand ideas, but my typing is very slow. My brain is even slower. So who knows how much I'll get through.
We certainly have a lot going on, and I think it's fantastic how much you manage to find time and energy to put into helping other writers. All the mentoring that you've done, and I know we've had some conversations offline about some projects for mentoring, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, but I think, I've been given so much fantastic help by the horror community and the writing community in general. I think we need to pay it forward and do what we can. And you don't have to be New York Times bestselling in order to be able to offer something to someone who's just starting out. So I think it's really important. I feel really strongly, and I've said this before, I'm really crap at promoting myself, really rubbish, and I don't have, Stephen's, prowess with the performance, the performance art and all that. So, what do? The service is the way, isn't it? People know my name because, she usually will do something for you. So, it works for me. So I'm very grateful. It sort of works both ways.
Well, and that's one of the things I love about being part of the horror community is so many people have that perspective that, every writer has something to offer, and every writer can use a hand now and then, and we're all willing to kind of help take others under our wings or just offer advice, which is great. So
yeah, and it's not a competition, a rising tide floats all boats, right?
Yes.
Although I wouldn't mind writing like some of these people underneath me. Wow, some amazing pieces. Really enjoyed those readings today.
Thank you, Lee.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
All of you. Yeah.
Well, I thank you again for joining us, for taking the time to read, and for bearing with us. This is one of the things that we really missed in the HWA New York chapter is our get-togethers, our in-person reading nights. And we're really excited that moving to this online platform has let us continue that and keep in touch and broaden our reach and include so many authors from distant places. And I think we're reaching people from distant places, and that's really wonderful to kind of keep people connected through all of this. So next month in February, we have for the past several years put on a Women in Horror Month reading at the KGB Bar and down on the Lower East Side. And KGB Bar has been, I think, closed or mostly closed now through pretty much the whole COVID pandemic. The fantastic fiction reading series, which occurs there, has also been online throughout this. And so we're disappointed we can't get together at that wonderful place. It has such a literary history there. But we're going to keep up our tradition of Women in Horror Month readings. And so February 12th, our next reading session will include Megan Arcuri, Nancy Lambert, and Karen Warren, and one more reader to be announced soon. We weren't quite able to finalize everything. Yep, I see Carol making the face. We'll round out the lineup. And hopefully by then we'll have our March lineup set too. But for those of you in the audience, please, if you enjoyed this tonight, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to be kept abreast of future sessions and broadcasts. Sign up for our newsletter. I put the link for that in the chat. I'll put it here again. It's a little bit of an odd URL, and we can't make this on-screen thing clickable, so I'll leave it up there for a minute. But we'd love to have you back. We expect to keep this going and expanding our roster of authors. If you have missed any of our past broadcasts, you can go to the Galactic Terrors YouTube channel and just look at them there. The recordings are all online. So any last words from our group tonight?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thanks so much. It was really fun. I enjoyed it.
I have one more word as well. You know, the chat sort of disappears when we turn off, but on the YouTube video underneath, it will appear tomorrow for a recording. And at that point, you can find all of the bios and the links for our special writers here and the link for the newsletter. So we don't spam you like crazy with the newsletter. Something comes out in the middle of the month to let you know what's coming up, and a reminder that day, because there's so many online events, you know, you don't want to lose track of us, do you?
No.
No. Once,
Because I might come to your house.
Okay. Okay. The cat won't mind. The cat will move over. There's room on the couch. Yeah.
okay, you'll love us once we get our claws in.
Put your hand down to the waste disposal. Isn't that what happens when? Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks again to everybody. We're going to roll our closing sequence here, but I want to thank you again. Have a great night. It's been wonderful to hear everybody, see everybody, and chat with you in the comments section. Take care.
And the authors can stay on for a minute after if you want.
Ooh.
All right.
Oh, all right.